All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another of phillipstown.info's forum for candidates running for office. In July, we'll be celebrating our 6th anniversary, and so it's becoming a bit of a long tradition of ours to have these forums. And we're proud to play our small role in the civic discussion about who should be in office. In this case, the Board of Trustees of the Village of Cold Spring. As you can see, we have 3 candidates running for 2 seats. My name is Kevin Foley, for the record, and for those who will be watching at home on our website, I'm the managing editor of phillipstown.info and our weekly print publication, The Paper. And asking the questions along with me tonight will be our senior reporter, Mike Turton, who has been covering the village for quite some time now for us. And the way we will proceed, our forums are usually what I would call a sort of formal, informal process. Mike and I will be doing the asking of the questions and leading the discussion. The candidates will also be free to address each other and follow up on other candidates' answers if they so choose, and they can have a discussion among them. The only thing we've asked them to do is that when we request that we move on, that they yield in whatever discussion they're having. We will start off with opening statements from each of the candidates. As has been our custom, there will not be audience participation. We have promised the candidates that this will be an unedited videotaping of their comments. We do reserve the right to edit out other people's comments. So with that, we'll begin the session, and we'll start at the end of the table with Steve Voloto for his opening statement.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out. My name is Steve Voloto. I live on Constitution Drive with my wife and my son and my 3 stepchildren. I've been in the village for 5 years now as a homeowner. I would like to say that I have been coming to this village since 1976, when I was 11 years old. My family moved here from Texas, and my aunt and uncle, the Manglasses, Mary and Ralph, owned the pharmacy, Butterfield Pharmacy, which is now Drug World, as you know it. And since that time, I could say that I've been in love with this place. It's a beautiful village, and I'm very honored to be able to live here. I really I could just say I have not done anything like this before. So if I'm stumbling, please bear with me for a moment. But and that's really my interest in running is I know I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. I'm restoring a house, and my wife and I are never leaving. And our youngest son is graduating from this school, hopefully, in 2030. So I am going to be here for quite some time, and I really want to have a say in what goes on in the village if I can help it.
Okay, Lynn.
Okay. Hello. 12 years ago, my husband Greg and I came into Cold Spring just on a whim one day. We'd been living in Yonkers for 7 years, which was not a really happy experience for us after having moved up from North Carolina and had deep roots in the community where we both grew up. Yonkers didn't really feel right to us, though we had to make a move to New York. And so just about every other weekend or so, we would come up hiking in Fonsstock Park. And on our way back home, we would turn left on Route 9 and head south. And then on a whim one day, Greg and I just drove straight and came into Cold Spring. And it's kind of a funny story. We were coming down Main Street, and our heads went like this. And we looked at each other, and we knew within 5 minutes that Cold Spring was the place that we'd been searching for 7 years, a place that we could call home, a safe place where our son could be assured to make good friends and go to a good school. It was a friendly community, and we really felt that it was a place where we could sink down roots. And 12 years later, we really feel rooted to this place, rooted to its beauty, to the community that has embraced us so warmly. And and we plan to stay here for the long haul. The economic crash of 2008 hit us really hard. Greg and I both lost our jobs. He lost our job with one of the first banks to fail. And I was a freelance worker and saw my bookings 6 months out dry up immediately. And so we were required to use our creativity to adapt to a terrible economic situation. And we used our creativity, we did a lot of exploration and research, and we decided to take our food service experience and make something fun, healthy, and enjoyable to contribute to our community. And so Go-Go Pops was born. After 2 years of offering our products in farmers markets, we decided to open a shop on Main Street because we knew that was where we wanted to be. And we count ourselves as really, really lucky people to be so warmly embraced, and our business to be so warmly embraced by so many residents and visitors alike. We focus on green business practices as much as we can, sourcing our products locally as much as we can. And we really appreciate the hand that our Cold Spring community has offered to us and contributed to our growing success. I was raised by my parents that it's my duty to give back to a community that has benefited me. And so the reason I'm running for village office is to do just that. I really believe that I have some skills that I can offer, most importantly, an open ear. And I hope to do just that, and I hope you'll allow me to do so.
Barney, please.
Good evening. Well, proving, I guess, if you live long enough, what's old becomes new. And I never thought I'd be at any event in Cold Spring where I would be the veteran. That being said, I ran for mayor last year, and many of you were here. I think most of you attended last year, and it was a campaign where there were a lot of issues that were brought forward, a lot of concerns that were expressed, and quite frankly, I'm running again because I think a lot of those are still on the table. My association with Cold Spring, again, I'll run through it briefly, is I've worked in the Hudson Valley for 25 years. I've lived in Cold Spring for the last 4, but I've been familiar with this community for 20 years. I've worked on grants with various nonprofits here, with former elected officials here, the LWRP, some of the initial waterfront grants back in the late 90s when I was associated with historic Hudson River towns. We did a lot of waterfront redevelopment, a lot of grant work, a lot of downtown revitalization. So since I arrived in Cold Spring about 4 years ago, I decided to make this my home. I'm an avid kayaker. I've been familiar with the community for almost 20 years, over 20 years. And in my time in Cold Spring, over that past 4 years, I've been actively involved across many facets of the community. The Emergency Services Task Force, the Zoning Board, the Code Update Committee, and probably most intimately with the Planning Board over the 2+ years that we worked on the Butterfield project. So I have a real nuts and bolts appreciation for what works in Cold Spring, what doesn't work in Cold Spring, and what we need to take a hard look at. And hopefully moving forward in these challenging times, and it is only going to get worse for small municipalities, we're going to see that very, very shortly. All right? I think I have the skill set. I think I have the experience. I think I've demonstrated the commitment. And quite honestly, I think the village, with Michael and Catherine leaving the village board, I think we need an independent voice. I think we need to have a perspective that maybe is a little different from the majority of the current board. And I hope to be in a position to be able to provide that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael, the first question, please.
Okay, the first question deals with how the board functions as a group. And when I interviewed each of you, I asked you if you felt the board in recent years has become too politicized, if there's been too much to do with party politics. And I thought Steve had an interesting response to the question. He kind of downplayed the political aspect of the question, but what he said was that he has seen a lot of divisiveness on the board, and he wondered aloud what pushes the anger, to use his words. My own observation is that animosity among some board members goes back at least as far as Seth Gallagher's term as mayor. And I'm wondering what you feel about, what is the issue there, if it is an issue, and is it significant in terms of how the village board can work for the betterment of the village? Who wants to tackle that first? Is my perception wrong? Is Steve's perception wrong that there's been no anger? No animosity?
What I said was, I didn't understand it. I didn't say there was none. And I'm not I don't understand what happened that led up to that. But I can say that going forward, I really don't have a dog in that fight, to use an old expression. I want to live in this village, and I want to help make it a better place. I really don't care who I'm on a board with. As a general contractor, which is what I do for a living, I have to work with all different kinds of people. Sometimes they're unhappy, sometimes they feel they've been wronged, but the bottom line is the budget and the price in a construction site anyway, and you have to make it work. As a general contractor, just because you don't get along with somebody, you can't walk away from it. You've contracted with someone to complete a job, and you have to do it. So whoever I'm on the board with, I'm gonna have to work with those people. That's just all there is to it. There's no, I don't like what he said, or I don't like what she said. That's too bad. We have to do something about making this village operate, and that's what the board is there to do.
I think it's very easy to focus on kind of juicy little conflicts and kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. Those of us who are running for village trustee, I mean, this is a small village. There are less than 2,000 people who live here, and we're less than 1 square mile. We're here with all our neighbors that we see every single day. And I think what's really important to remember when attempting to represent your neighbors is that no group of people is always going to agree on everything. But you have to approach the job with the assumption that everybody is bringing the best that they've got to offer, and that you're going to bring the best you've got to offer to solve the challenges that face us. If we just focus on the little nitpicky differences and allow that to tear us apart, especially in such a small community where we see each other every day, that leads to a lot of divisiveness. It leads to kind of undermining the overall goal of improving our village environment and how our village works. And I think it's really important just not to lose sight of the bigger picture and really focus on bringing the best that we've got to offer and expect that from everybody.
Barney, please.
Could you just go over it briefly? Because I think there are a couple of parts.
Sure. It was, Steve had commented that while he didn't really talk about the political nature of the board, but he had seen a lot of divisiveness, and he wondered what was pushing the anger. So what he has seen, at least in part, is anger. And my comment was that I've seen animosity since covering the board back to Seth's time as mayor. There's been some animosity, I think, with each administration on the board. Is that an issue? And if so, how should trustees deal with that?
I think I think it is an issue. I mean, but as I said when we spoke, I don't think it's so much politics as it is partisanship. And by partisanship, I don't necessarily mean that there's a political affiliation or a party affiliation, because there's not in this community, or there shouldn't be. As Lynn said, it's slightly more than 2,000 people. I think the problem goes back to where people feel passionate about a position, people feel passionate about an idea, and unfortunately it's when people reference it as being political, I think it harkens back to what we're seeing in our country on a national level, in that people come to a situation or a position where they have a preconceived idea, all right? Whether it's not my backyard NIMBYism, or whether it has to do with how a project is developed or how a zoning regulation is enacted, people feel disenfranchised, or more so, perhaps they feel that their opinion is the correct opinion. And people do not see, in general in this community or in this country today, that politics is an opportunity to compromise. I mean, realistically, the best solutions, I think we've all heard, are the ones that leave everybody feeling slightly aggrieved. All right? If you come into a situation or you leave a situation feeling your interests weren't served or your voice wasn't heard, you have no stake in maintaining that decision or maintaining that organization. Right? This came up time and time again during the Butterfield process. People would come to meetings or positions that were preconceived, passionate, dearly held, and continuously argued about. And what it really comes down to in any kind of community or in any type of government situation is the rule of law. Does everybody have an opportunity to participate? Does everybody have an opportunity to get their opinions heard or their concerns addressed? But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. You have to follow the rules. You have to play by the rules. And just because it might not break your way doesn't absolve you from having to participate or observe what the common good is. And I think at times over the last couple of years, in general, that's been lost sight of in this country. And I think because this is such a small community where people brush up against each other every day, we have examples of it every day. And it's something I think we have to be cognizant of. But again, we need to have clear, consistent application of what our regulations are, what our rules are, what our goals and objectives are. And they have to be mutually agreed on, and everybody has to observe them. And I think if we have more of that, where people realize that, okay, I might not have gotten my way, but at least I understand the process, I was given a fair hearing, I understand what other priorities may have come into play that maybe I didn't realize, or maybe I still don't agree. But you have to trust the process, you have to invest in the process, and you have to participate in the process. And I think to a degree that's what's lacking here today.
I would like to say one thing in response to that, if I could. I've got some experience in meeting facilitation that I got through my work with the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives. In meeting facilitation, there's collaboration and there's compromise. I think one of the things that's really incumbent upon anybody that's running for public office is a willing to collaborate with the people you're working with, a willing to collaborate to bring the best that you've got to offer and assume everybody else is doing the same thing, and also keep an ear open and also recognize the fact that you might not know all the facts of the case and that you're willing to hear new information and maybe adjust your position on things based on new facts that you might not have known about. And what I've learned through meeting facilitation is that when people come to a compromise, everybody's kind of given up something to get to an answer.
Exactly.
If you commit to collaboration, making sure, and this, sometimes it takes longer to get there and it's harder work, but when you're making your choice of who you want to really represent you, I think it's important to remember that you want somebody who's willing to talk to people who they might not necessarily agree with. And that somehow or other, through this process, if we keep working on it, keep respectfully working on it, that we'll get to an answer that represents what's good for the most people, instead of just everybody giving up a little bit just to get an answer.
Okay. I'd like to move on a little bit now. And in the last couple of weeks in our newspaper and on our website, we ran some multicolored pie charts. And those pie charts represented probably the biggest responsibility you all will have, if elected, in serving on the Board of Trustees of the village. And that has to do with the expenditures of the village budget and the revenues of the village. And so what we want to do now is just explore some of the issues. We're not going to go through the entire village budget because we promised to get out of here in a reasonable time. But we do think there are some big ticket items in terms of consideration of both revenue and expenditures. And it's one of the first duties you'll have when you take office is to look at the budget for the new fiscal year coming up. So, Mike?
Okay, Sheriff Donald Smith is fond of referring to Putnam as the safest county in New York State. And on any given day, residents in the village see their own police force on village streets, as well as New York State Police sheriff's deputies, MTA police, state park police, and DEP police. The Cold Spring Police Department currently costs about $400,000, I think it's more than $400,000 a year, and covers the village 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What are your thoughts on whether or not that level of expenditure is warranted? And if so, why? And if not, how might that be reduced? And I think we started with Steve the first time. I think.
Yeah, we should start on this end with Barney.
Okay. Well, you left out the MTA police.
The which?
The MTA
No,
police.
did I? Okay.
But the fact of the matter is, we're well protected. And I think when you talk about, areas where the village spends a lot of money, and the police, our police protection is part of that. It's approximately 30% of our tax levy, just a little shy of $500,000 now. We do have, I believe, 14 sworn officers, and as you said, in terms of the shifts and whatever. I think I said in our interview, when you asked me a similar question, when you look at a budget and you have a single expenditure that represents 30% of your outlay, you can't help but appreciate the fact that there's got to be ways to deliver that service more effectively, more efficiently. And I think everybody has observed our police force in action in one time or another, and they do a great job. But as you approach, some of the other opportunities, as you indicated, the Sheriff's Department provides specialized services, the state police or have the Criminal Investigative Bureau. We have issues with substance abuse, low-level crime that is a direct result of perhaps some of the substance abuse, some of the quality of life issues that we have. We have problems with parking enforcement, and realistically, in terms of maybe utilizing our police force more productively, more efficiently, I think what will end up happening is there are opportunities going forward where our police force should partner with the sheriff's office, partner with the state police, and maybe think of ways to provide either enhanced coverage or reduce cost. We have the sheriff's substation in Nelsonville that the lease was just renewed. So the sheriff's office intends to hopefully have a more consistent, enlarged presence here. That's an opportunity for us to speak to what our police coverage is. Are we getting the best bang for our buck? There's maybe a disconnect between the administration of our police force and the most efficient way it can be utilized. Realistically, we can go into a lot greater detail, but you indicate you want to move this along, so.
Lynn?
I actually did serve for a year as a trustee, as an appointed trustee to fill out the remainder of one person's term. And during that time, I actually went to, I was involved in a conversation with some other municipalities talking about the general idea of consolidation of services and stuff. And the woman, I can't recall her name right off the top of my head, but she was the supervisor of the town of Cortland. And she was really, really adamant
Linda
about...
Puglisi.
That's right, thank you. She had very strong opinions about disbanding their police force and relying on the state police, which had a substation near there. That seems kind of like a good idea. I'm not really sure it really works for us. One of the things that I really appreciate having a teenager that's grown up here is the real community nature of our police force, that most of the kids around here know who the cops are and the cops know them. For the most part, our cops are really responsive to them. And I would I think there's a lot to be gained by really exploring this and try to come up with some sort of hybrid of having our own community police force as well as, working out a succinct, workable program of involving the sheriffs and also the other police forces that seem to buzz through our community. One of the things that's really of concern and that I'd like to have a really good handle of and as a community is, we're kind of in this drug corridor between Peekskill and Beacon and Newburgh, and it kind of, comes through here back and forth quite a bit. And, you know, my own son has seen the effects that this has had on some of his friends and some of his dear friends, and it's not been a happy one. I think it's really important that we try to preserve that friendly connection between our youth and our police. And if we, you know, I know there are some people that really advocate for just disbanding our police force and will rely only on the sheriff's deputies and stuff. I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think we need to work really hard to find economies where we can, but also preserve our community policing and the relationship, the friendly relationship that we have with the cops in our town.
Okay, Steve.
Well, I agree with both of them. I think that I would like to see the police department do a lot more traffic stops and a lot more writing of tickets for illegal parking. I'm very frustrated with that. But also traffic stops would also perhaps you could, you know, with the people passing through in the drug corridor like Lynn's talking about, I think we need stronger police on Route 9D there. I think that, you know, they are coming through here. It's the only way to get from, or one of the only ways to get from Peekskill down to Beacon. So I would like to see them patrolling a lot more out there and pulling over suspicious people, speeders, et cetera. But speaking of eliminating the police department, I don't know if it's you know, it's a cost versus quality of service kind of a thing. If we're gonna have to pay the county to patrol here and we get rid of our police department, you know, is it really worth it, the sacrifice of, like Lynn says, of the police officers that know the community and know the people in it and their children, just to save a couple bucks? I think that it really needs some serious study before we go charging into eliminating the police department altogether. I think that's it. Yeah.
I don't think you said eliminating the police department was, at least it didn't sound the initial question, because I think what ends up happening, excuse me, is you've had different consolidation studies or different attempts recently in the county with Carmel and the town of Carmel, the sheriff's department, and it really has not worked out, because when you look at what the costs are, the inherent costs, you still have to provide personnel. Right now, the Carmel Police Union is in litigation against the Carmel Town Board because they're in an agreement with the sheriff's office about who's going to patrol what. And they have a labor grievance about it. So I think Steve is right. We have to be very careful about how we approach these things. There's an opportunity to consolidate. There's an opportunity to develop some synergies. But realistically, we all know this community gets slammed with visitors 9 months a year, 3 or 4 days a week. We need an on-site presence just in terms of quality of life, traffic enforcement, and so forth. And I don't think when the dust settles with what that would cost us to bring them from Carmel or bring them from the state police is what Linda Puglisi has done. Well, now she has a relationship with the Westchester County Police. So there's an inherent cost for providing police service. It doesn't matter who provides it, but there's an inherent cost. And I think we need to look at that. But I don't think we want to jump the gun about eliminating a police presence.
Okay, so for the time being, we'll leave the police in the budget, and we'll move forward.
It's still 30%, so
And
there's
so-
savings to be had there.
Okay, well, let's talk about some savings. So one of the things that we realize when we look at the village budget and we look at the town operations is that we seem to have a number of similar departments in close proximity to one another. So currently, it makes a difference where you get your speeding ticket. And that sometimes can be a matter of a few yards as to what court you go to. We have a town highway department, we have a village highway department, we have a town building inspector, we have a village building inspector, and so on. So we have a number of services, and the reason we're even having this conversation really is because the state government has made it clear so far over a number of years that there will continue to be a cap on the ability of local governments to assess property owners for revenue, which is the chief form of revenue for the village. And so the squeeze is every year gets a little tighter. This year, the village, I think, is authorized to raise an additional $1,800 from the property taxpayers. And so that will not go very far, even in a small government. And so when you think about the village operations, and leaving the police force more or less intact, where else might we begin to consider reducing the expenditures of the village government? Are you willing to entertain the idea? There have been a number of hours of discussion about, well, maybe we could combine the building inspector or the courts or the highway department, et cetera. It seems to move very, very slowly. And just so what we're asking tonight is, are there areas of consolidation that you would begin to push for if you were elected? And Lynn, why don't we start with you in the middle, and we'll go to Steve and to Barney.
Okay. I'm not sure I have a direct answer for that right now. I had an idea, some ideas a few years ago, but things change over a few years. We're also facing the retirement of a number of very significant employees, village employees. And so we're going to be having to, we're facing pension costs and additional benefits costs going forward too. What's really important to me is to seek and find and implement new sources of revenue that are not tax related for our village. And I think there are a lot of opportunities out there.
Okay, name a couple.
Okay, well, number one, I think we could finally come to work on and implement some kind of agreement with the New York State Parks as far as the development of Dockside. I'd like to preserve its beauty, but I think there are some potentials there of maybe leasing some of the property to, for example, kayak owners who might want to board their kayaks there. I mean, I'm just pulling this out of my hat at this point. But there are a lot of opportunities where we really could increase our revenue without taxing our taxpayers. I think whatever, our waterfront is one of our most valuable assets. Right now, we're really not seeing any return on it, yet we spend a lot of money on preserving it. I think we need to look at this really, really hard, go back to the comprehensive plan, see what works in other riverfront communities.
Okay. Right now, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
That's
we're
okay.
talking about the expenditures. We are
Yes.
going to get to revenue very shortly.
Sure.
So, Steve, expenditures.
Well, I think that any consolidation is quite an undertaking. And before we enter into any permanent binding contracts, we need to really look at it carefully and make sure that, it's going to work for the village. Looking at it and being in the business, I see the building department, that makes sense to me, but to consolidate with the town. But to my mind, I need to know that the village is still going to have some oversight, because the village needs are a little different than the rest of Phillipstown. And there's a lot of old buildings and there's a lot of unique situations that might not work with the town's way of doing business. I really want to look into this and see if it makes sense.
Okay, Barney?
So we're doing expenditures, not revenue.
Expenditures.
Got it,
What would you
okay.
cut?
Okay, what would we cut? Well, first off, I will say that the general fund, can everybody hear me? Is this coming through okay, Greg? Because I would prefer to sit back. The general fund is about, the tax levy is about just shy of $1.6 million. It's about $1.57 million now. When you look at expenditures, we had this conversation last year. In terms of where you can cut.
We'll probably have it next year, too.
Well,
so,
probably.
okay.
I think it's a good thing because, quite honestly, we raised this issue last year, and remember, you guys were like, "Oh, really? The tax cap?" So I'm glad to see that's first and foremost. But in terms of where our expenditures are that we can cut, realistically, the village budget does run a fairly lean budget. But one of the problems we have, if you look at the village budget, it's like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Every year, they just roll over the budget, they change a couple lines, change a couple of things. As I said last year, you need to have asset management and you need zero-based budgeting. We need to justify, why is this line here, why does this department spend this? Not, last year we spent $5,000 on this, this year we should spend $3 or we should spend $6. an opportunity to cut expenditures, specifically where we are now. We've had a very mild winter. So whatever was programmed for snow removal, there's an opportunity to recapture that amount, that line there. It's budgeted at $25,000 in this budget. Got to believe most of that money is still there or should be there and is available to use rolling forward. Another avenue where you can take a look at decreasing our expenditures is probably, and I said this in an interview and it's an ongoing issue here, is probably our legal expenditures. Because I don't think there's a conscious application of when you speak to a lawyer or when you use outside legal counsel, there's always an inherent cost. And as I recall, the last time this was discussed at a village board meeting, we paid a bill for $21,000 or $22,000, and it was back in September. The whole general budget line for legal expenditures is $42,000. So I can imagine where those expenses are today. So that's something we can probably be a little bit more cautious on in that regard. In terms of where else we can probably economize is if you look at our budget, and the reason I said it was the 1.57 million, is our unrestricted fund balance, general fund balance now, is up to $463,000. That is a massive amount of undesignated money relative to our budget. It's almost 30%. Now, I know approximately $200,000 is probably earmarked to defray the village's contribution to the Main Street program. But that still leaves us with an undesignated fund balance that's almost 20% of our budget. From a budgeting practices point of view, we should not be carrying that kind of money and just rolling it over year after year after year. Most school districts, according to the Comptroller's Office, are tasked with having a 4 to 7% fund balance. Most municipalities look to keep 10%. Like I said, right now we're at 30. Give it 20 for the Main Street. We're still at 20%. We do not need to keep $250,000 around for a rainy day. It should either be returned to the taxpayers or it should be earmarked to defray some of the infrastructure costs that we keep kicking down the road.
Okay, thank you. And what we'll shift gears a little bit now, and because it seems to be a necessity that we bring in more revenue just based on what we've been saying. So let's talk a little bit about revenue. Michael?
Okay, that's one area where there seems to be unanimous agreement that the village needs more revenue. A pay station is being established in the municipal lot on Fair Street, and that'll bring in a modest amount of revenue. But on a larger scale, the idea of putting parking meters on Main Street has been discussed at least going back before the comprehensive plan was approved in 2012. So has the time come for putting parking meters on Main Street to generate revenue? Or do you feel that the parking meters would be too detrimental to the character or feel of the village or other disadvantages? I think Barney's up to start this
Okay.
time.
Detrimental to the character of the village, I don't really see that as an issue. I mean, Nyack has parking meters, Kingston has parking meters, Beacon now is looking to put parking meters on Main Street, because guess what? They have a revenue problem. You know, join the club. So that's part of one of my pet peeves about when we look at municipal governance, particularly as it relates to Cold Spring. You know, we don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel all the time. Let's just observe what the best practices are. Let's listen to the conversations that have already taken place on this subject and find out how we can learn from that and use that information to make our community better. You know, when you talk about parking meters and the pay station on Fair Street, that is part of a much larger problem or solution. And Catherine Faddy and her parking committee have spent a lot of time on reactivating this. They went to the state, our state representatives, and they were able to get our parking permit system expanded, all right, and to include more streets. Now, we can't have a conversation about installing parking meters until we have a workable parking permit system, because that's not going to be fair to the residents that don't have driveways, that don't have access to off-street parking. So while we need parking, while I believe we need parking meters in terms of it being the low-hanging fruit, because it's anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 of additional revenue, depending on how we program them. I'm a commuter. I get on the 6 o'clock train, and I see people swooping into this village, parking on Main Street at 6 o'clock in the morning and then disappearing for 12 or 14 hours. Well, if we had smart meters on Main Street, we could program those meters to go on at 4 o'clock in the morning, charge $5 an hour to discourage people from parking there, and then shut them off at 10 o'clock or reduce the rates when the business is opened. So there are smart ways to manage that liability to generate revenue, but it's part and parcel of a parking meter. The second thing that I'd like to see, and we were part of an experimental grant program up in Kingston a few years back. So I know it's out there. I haven't really checked on it lately, but we have issues with our dam maintenance, our dam replacement, our dam repairs, which are going to cost us millions of dollars. And we all know that because it's been kicking around for 10 or 12 years. I'd like to see that maybe as a part of looking at that dam replacement or maintenance, that we put in hydropower, all right? Where we can do reverse metering and sell it back to the utilities and generate a constant revenue stream for the village to either defray the cost of the bonds to repair the dams or maybe put it into the general account. That alone could generate several $100,000 a year that we could use to debt service to fund some of the bonding for these $10 or $12 million of projects that are staring us in the face.
Okay, Lynn, parking, but you can also go on to other subjects as Barney did.
Okay. As a Main Street business owner, I look out my window 6 days a week, and I see what happens with parking. I've even documented some very, very silly parking practices on Main Street, which are not efficient at all. One of the things that really bothers me is other Main Street merchants that park right in front of their stores, which keep people away from spending money in my store as well as their own store. And also, I see the commuters that park on Main Street and run down to the train station and are gone all day. And ultimately, that has an effect on my bottom line. And it also has an effect on the village's bottom line. Like Barney said, parking meters are the low-hanging fruit. Unfortunately, a lot of people who live in the village think that it's and believe, from some perspective, believe that it's an additional tax and an unfair tax on village residents, you know, if you want to do business on Main Street, and that it discourages local people from doing local business. The smart meters that I was interested in when I was on the board six years ago could be programmed any way we want. They could be programmed to have really low fees while parking demand is really low, and a higher fee when parking demand is really high, or no fee when, when somebody just wants to park somewhere and run in for 15 minutes, get a bucket of paint and go. I really think that parking meters could help solve a lot of problems that we face, particularly the revenue, providing an additional revenue stream to the village that is actually non-taxed on village property owners.
Okay, Steve?
I agree that the village should have parking meters. And for a while when I was reading about this, I'm picturing a parking meter that you get out and you put quarters in. And I think a lot of people might think that that's how it is, but it's, the technology is really amazing. And you can have a 15-minute grace period, so you're not required to pay anything if you're just running in to get a coffee or some paint or something quick. So originally, my concern about meters on Main Street was that it would reduce some of the business on Main Street, because people don't want to go through the trouble of going to the kiosk and paying and taking the sticker and putting it on their dashboard just to go get a cup of coffee. But I know now that that's not how it is. But what I really would like to see in the meantime is the police department enforcing the parking regulations that we have in this village. It doesn't seem to be in their purview or something. Perhaps I'm using the wrong word, but I don't see it happening. So I would like to push really hard to make sure that these rules that we have are being enforced even-handedly.
I'd just like to add, because I think it's important for anybody who's looked at parking or who's studied parking in other communities, particularly given the layout of our village, is and you can do smart meters, which is great. You put one pay station on for 10 spaces, and you can be having dinner in a restaurant, and your phone beeps saying your time is up, and you just hit your smartphone, and you're good to go. All right? So we don't need to have a collection agent and empty buckets of quarters and worry about theft. So that's ancient history. But as good as parking meters are, and as badly as we need the revenue, it has to be part and parcel of a parking permit system. Because even wherever you put parking meters, if you don't have enforcement, as Steve pointed out, and you don't have a parking permit system, you're just going to push those people onto the side streets, and the residents are going to take the brunt of it. But that being said, what we have to remember from a revenue perspective, parking meters or a parking space is a user fee, right? We have people coming here on weekends, driving Maseratis and whatever, and I've personally directed them outside of Catherine's restaurant, and they laugh at us. They can't believe they don't have to pay for parking. They have no issue paying for parking. I'd make it $2 or $3 an hour on a weekend, and then drop it back to 50 cents during the week. Right? Let's use that asset to generate income so we don't have to go back to the taxpayers.
Well, I would just like to add, the violations that take place when there are these smart meters and stuff, the police are still going to have to be involved in the enforcement, I assume. There's still going to have to be tickets written for people that
Yeah, but
leave
it's
their
also,
car there. I
it's
don't
also,
know.
the tickets are gonna be, can be electronically generated, and you don't
Right.
have to worry about a cop chalking somebody's tire and
Okay.
then not chalking the
This is
tire
my
across the
confusion
street.
because I'm not really too sharp on the new stuff. But
Okay.
how do they know if a car's been there that long? How do they know if they've gone beyond? I mean, is there a
There's,
how does the device know if you did not leave and you went past your parking?
because it, like anything else, like, and this is a very Cliff Notes version of it, it's kind of like an easy pass. You know, the police officer or, you know, has the equipment in his vehicle that he can go in.
So the police will be involved.
And it'll generate an electronic record.
I understand.
Okay.
I thought you were saying the device itself is going to know this somehow, which
No, a strobe light's not gonna go off on, like, yeah,
it's spooky enough just to be true, you know? So,
probably, yeah.
so a police officer is going to have to be involved in this, or a
Well,
parking person?
Well, no,
or-
it generates a
or
report
something.
at the end of the shift. It's the police officer, basically, the police officer does what he does now, it drives around and observes. And it automatically, it's
I
a
see.
radio, it's a smart card, it's a
I
radio
understand.
wave, and it just generates a report at the end of the shift, what's overdue, what's parking, and so forth. And it's no fuss, no muss, it's revenue for the village.
Before we get bogged down in all the details about how this works, I think it's important that to recognize that whoever is going to be making these decisions moving forward has a really good sense of what parking needs are, what parking in Cold Spring actually is and how it actually works and doesn't work, and also has, you know, a willingness to look creatively at it and also try to get it happening. A lot of us have read the book, The High Cost of Free Parking. And on Mike Armstrong's recommendation, I really appreciate it. It's one of the most interesting things I've ever read and really useful. And I see how implementing some sort of way of charging for parking is really going to help us out and solve a lot of problems that we face on a day-to-day basis. And it's possible for us if we put our heads together and really work on it and keep all options on the table, that we can put a system in place fairly quickly that's going to solve these problems and be fair to both residents and visitors alike.
That's in fact what the current village board and the current parking committee have been working on for the past year in terms of signage, in terms of wayfinding and so forth. So that's the other problem, as I see it, that we have in Cold Spring. We love to talk and talk and talk about a problem, and when we have a solution staring us in the face that we need to implement. That's what we need to be able to do, is take everybody's opinion, compromise, collaborate, but at the end of the day, we need to make a decision and we need to move forward. That's why we have some of the problems piling up in this community in terms of maintenance, infrastructure, and whatever, because we're not willing to address the situation. I mean, look at the situation with the dams. I mean, everybody here knows about the situation with the dams. We talk about it at every election. I'm sure we're gonna come up with the fire department at some point. Everybody knows the issues with the fire department. We talk about it at every election. Let's make a commitment to move these issues forward, or at least level with people and say, you know what, we're not gonna do that, it's too expensive, or I don't wanna do it, or I don't see it as a priority for me, so I'm not gonna work on it.
Okay. Staying with the idea of revenue, and we're not going to get to the fire department, but
I'm sure they'll be happy to hear that.
it's no disrespect to the fire department. We can't discuss every issue every time. There are two village properties. One of them is known as the Boat Club property, which everyone probably recognizes is undergoing some work. And there is the highway garage property. When the village adopted a comprehensive plan, the plan spoke about both of these properties as potential revenue sources for the village. So what I'm asking is really whether or not you would be willing to explore the idea of both the boat club property, in which a renegotiation will have to take place with the boat club about their status there, but whether you would entertain the idea that that property could be used for other purposes in concert with the boat club operations to develop revenue, and whether you would entertain the idea that the highway garage could potentially make use of the garage, the town garage on Fishkill Road in Nelsonville, or some other accommodation so that that property, which has an excellent location, and when the comprehensive plan was being developed, there was a great deal of excited discussion about what the potential of that property could be in the way of hotel, entertainment venue, et cetera. So would you be willing to push in both of these cases for a development plan for both of these properties? Steve, why don't we start with you?
Well, with the boat club property, I think that, once the abatement of the toxic waste there is finished, I think that anything is possible. If someone has an idea or a proposal for something to do with that property, I'm glad to hear it. Same for the highway department. I can't really comment on yeah, I would do it, or no, I wouldn't. I don't really feel that that I have enough information to make an informed decision on it. But I'm open to anything in this village that preserves the quality of life we have and the unique historic, outlook, I guess I would say, that this town has. Yeah, so
Okay.
I need to know more, I guess.
I believe that the boat club property is, well, first of all, I'm really, really happy that the toxic deposits that are there are finally being removed. And I'm also really, really happy that the state is paying for that and that the costs of that are not falling on any of us. The boat club property is one of the most valuable assets we have as a community. It's possible moving forward. I believe it's possible, and I'm committed to working on this, if given the opportunity, of moving forward to find a way so that the boat club property is developed in such a way to respect the needs and the wants of people wanting to have river access, and work with the boat club in such a way so that it can set itself up in maybe a new formulation, a new structure, so that we actually can charge for parking boats there and docking and, I'm not a real boat person, but putting in and out, whatever that means. And launching, that's right. And, that would require probably having a harbor master hired to pay attention to it all the time. But I really do believe that there's a way to restructure it to keep the members of the boat club still happy, but also to open up the use of that valuable property that all of us pay to maintain and that belongs to all of us, so that it represents inclusive use for all of us. From that property all the way through the dock and through dockside. I think we need to look at the whole thing comprehensively, as the comprehensive plan did, but actually look in more detail and figure creative ways of making that work for us.
Barney.
Okay, well, at this point, I could just say, see my answer to this question last year. But,
Well, help us out a little anyway.
but that being the case, see, what did I start last year at the garage? I'll start at the boat club this year and go around that way. First off, just a little point of correction, we don't maintain the boat club site. The boat club doesn't maintain the boat club site. That's part of the problem. We have a bulkhead that is deteriorating, all right, that is leaching whatever into the river, all right? The boat club maintains that it's village property, the village is responsible for it. The village maintains, well, a part of the lease, the boat club is responsible for maintaining it. So as our mayor said recently, we're back to square one with the boat club. I think Lynn is right in that it's a valuable piece of property. Riverfront in river towns in the village, in villages like this in generally, is very valuable. That being said, I think there's an opportunity for, as Steve had indicated, there has to be some type of public-private partnership. We've been very successful in promoting these in other communities, Beacon, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh. Maybe Newburgh's not the best example of the route they took, but Nyack, Peekskill, we had a similar thing with a boat club, Ossining, Croton. So again, this is not rocket science, this is not new information. But what it requires us to do is to sit down, every one of us, people who are members of the boat club, people who are members of the village, people who are village residents who aren't aware that we're on the Hudson River, believe it or not. There are those people. But this is a resource that we need to manage in a way that generates revenue, that protects the environment, and enhances the quality of life in our village going forward, right? The boat club has to have a candid conversation. I mean, they're an important part of the community. They need to have access to the site, but like everybody else, they need to share, right? And the opportunity to develop infrastructure down there that generates revenue, that's not something the village can afford to do. That's not something the boat club can afford to do. But what we can do is partner with maybe a private concern or a larger governmental concern and generate creative ways, maybe have a public meeting, a couple of charrettes, build off of what was in the comprehensive plan, build up off of what's in the LWRP, right? And come up with something that generates revenue and addresses the environmental hazard. Moving over to Dockside, we had this conversation last year. The State Parks Department is not going to permit us to commercialize Dockside. It is dedicated state parkland. We had this conversation last year. There is an outstanding lease that the village has not acted on in the last 3 years because they know full well that the Department of Parks is not going to allow them to commercialize Dockside. So if we execute that lease, all we are doing is incurring maintenance issues and liability. Right now we have unlimited access, and we don't have the liability. I know because I run 2 or 3 events a year. I have down there for 20 years, kayaking for the cure. And if I need access to that site, I call up Bill Bauman in Fawnstock. He's responsible for it. I get the permit. I let the village know there's an activity happening there. We're responsible for cleanup. We have to post a bond. No muss, no fuss, no liability to the village. And it generates income in terms of people spending the day here, spending money. Dockside is what Dockside is, and if anybody tells you any different, they either don't know what they're speaking of or they're misleading you. As far as the highway garage, as the comprehensive plan states, that is a huge opportunity. In the planning board last year, we had the old Impellitteri garage property. Blue Homes was going to go in there. What we were able to do is leverage that and have the owner of that property clean up the environmental hazard there that he had let gone for 20 years that the village never got around to enforcing. But because he wanted to sell the property, we got his attention and we made him clean up the site. So that site is still there, it's clean and it's available. You have the village garage that kind of wraps around it. So that's a huge opportunity to move the garage off-site, maybe consolidate with Nelsonville, with the county, with the town of Phillipstown, do a shared services intermunicipal agreement, and then generate some development rights for that site. Whether we market it through the county EDC, whether we use Hudson Valley EDC, but let's cast the net out there, let's do an RFQ, let's find out what's available, and we might not be having this conversation about revenue next year. We might be arguing what we want to see there.
I'd just like to add something to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the unlimited access to Dockside, that you said it generates money for, businesses and what, but the village doesn't get anything out of that. And I think that pursuing that agreement with the state for use of that area would really help the village. Because I believe that we could permit all kinds of things to happen once we have control of that site. And this, a part of that agreement, as I understood it, we were going to be allowed to actually profit from the use of the area. So you could have weddings, small concerts, food trucks. Like, there's any number of creative things that I'm sure people more creative than I could come up with that does not include a permanent structure down there, because I don't really want to see that personally. But we could, as a village, I think that, you can charge a lot of money for somebody that wants to have a wedding out on the end of Dockside, on the point there where they have the movies. It's, I think it's worth looking into.
Not to, but I've done these agreements with state parks before in other sites, and there are pages of restrictions about what you can do. State Parks is your partner. They get a % of the gross. They are very specific about what kind of structures, what kind of utilization, alcohol access, parking would not be allowed. I mean, there's all kinds of environmental abatements that you would need to do, plus the liability. If you speak to some of the Parks Department employees at Fawnstock, who will tell you that the right-of-way, there are all kinds of overgrown trees. Every time there's a storm, things fall and whatever. The day after the village signs that liability agreement, we would be responsible for tree clearing and maintaining the right-of-way for utilities. So the opportunities for revenue are nowhere near what the potential liabilities are. We can probably creatively access that or leverage it like the Film Society does now. We have access to it as a community. We don't have any of the maintenance and we don't have any of the liability. I don't see really how State Parks is going to alter their master licensing agreement to allow Cold Spring to profit from it. And I think in the past, when village government has approached parks about that and they found out what the conditions are and what the limitations are, they basically say, well, thank you very much, never mind. And that's why we don't have anything on the books with Dockside now, because it just doesn't work to our advantage.
I think it's important, though, to continue the conversation with the Parks Departments, though. And also really emphasize to the parks what a valuable piece of property that is and how connected Cold Spring is to it, and that we do have a need there. And that we really don't want to keep kicking this down the road, that we really would like to develop this so that it benefits all of us who live here.
Okay.
Okay. So we'd like to ask each of you, and hopefully for a relatively quick answer, to choose something that we haven't spoken about that you would like to work on personally, should you be elected. One project, and tell us just a little bit how you think it would benefit the village. Doesn't have to be revenue or expenditures necessarily, although everything has that implication. But one thing that you think you would like most to work on.
Top of your list.
Whoever would like to go first can go first.
Go first.
Okay, I would like to review the comprehensive plan. I think that it's an important blueprint for the development of the village, and I think it bears study on my part anyway, so I'm interested in that.
The thing that really resonates with me and that is really important to me is I'm a Cold Spring resident. I'm also a Main Street business owner. And I see the impacts that ever-increasing tourism has on us on a daily basis. I see the costs that we get absolutely no help from either the state or the county with addressing, things like traffic congestion, parking, trash in particular, and also the strain on our emergency services with a rescue that seems to happen every single weekend, as well as, just the wear and tear on our infrastructure. As a Main Street business owner, I do get a lot of my revenue from local businesses. However, from local patrons. However, I don't feel right taking advantage of the revenue for me that tourism, that ever-increasing tourism, brings to our village and brings to me, without somehow or other working really hard and dedicating myself really hard to mitigating the impacts on our citizens. It bothers me enormously that I send a whole lot of money to Albany that goes to Carmel, and it never comes back to us. Carmel is very, very happy to pour a whole bunch of money into bringing more tourism that lands in our laps, but they don't help us. They don't give a dime or a damn about what it even costs us. So this is really important to me. It's not fair for us just to make a living off of tourism and saddle my neighbors with the costs of it. So that's the probably number one important thing that I want to work on.
Barney.
I would say, harking back to what I said last year, as well as what undercuts all of the conversations we've had tonight, is really about asset management, right? This village really has no idea what it owns, what condition it's in, what the shelf life is, whether it's knowledge work. It's been brought up by me and by others here tonight that we have senior employees that are going to be hitting 20-year marks, looking to retire and whatever. What are we doing to capture those best practices? How do they do their job? right? We really don't know. There's no set manual, an opportunity, what we spend on trash and infrastructure, all right, is, it's kind of word of mouth. It's grown up over the years in terms of what the trash routes are, how do we dispose of it, what is our unit cost, what is our manpower cost, the dams, we have a potential $10 million liability with the dams. We're looking to hire new consultants now to do a dam, renovation management plan, because the last consultant we used, we waited so long to do anything that the report is out of date. So now we have to get a new report because the regulations have changed. So we need to have asset management, we need to have zero-based budgeting, because once we know what we have, what we need to spend, we can then start creatively thinking how we can leverage that, how we can partner with the county, how we can partner with tourism, how we can partner with a private developer down to do something maybe at Dockside or up the highway garage. But until we know where we are and where we're going, we can't even intelligently negotiate going forward.
Okay, thanks. So we have a last question for each of you that's more direct to each of you about your candidacies. Mike?
Okay, so Barney, in your letter of resignation from the planning board, you made a pretty strong statement, which in part read, the malice, arrogance, and incompetence that the majority of the village board members demonstrated on an almost daily basis is breathtaking. Strong stuff. If that is still your view, can you speak to how that view will affect your ability to work effectively with those board members?
Well, I would say, is this the planning board resignation or the code update committee resignation we're talking about?
I get my resignations
Yeah,
confused,
it's-
so.
It's been one of those years in the
Okay.
village, and I wasn't alone, let me just clarify that. But
But you're alone in running.
I'm a man alone.
that group.
Yeah, I know. Because in any way, in terms of strong stuff, how it will impact my ability to work with,
With the board members.
Okay.
Village board members.
well, first off, as far as the planning board was concerned, or the code update committee, or the emergency management committee, we never all agreed on everything. You have to, again, reach a consensus, you have to be able to collaborate, you have to be willing to listen, you have to be willing to change your opinion, you have to be willing to, absorb new facts, new conditions, new situations, and deal with them appropriately, all right? And I would hope whoever the other 4 members of the village board are willing to listen. Because I certainly have demonstrated my ability to adapt, and quite honestly, what ends up happening.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
3 of them are
Okay.
going to be the people you said were incompetent, right? So
Right.
we have to address that particular issue, don't you think?
In terms of, well, I hope they're more competent now.
Okay,
But, I
all right,
mean-
yeah, I'm not,
But actually, not to be facetious, but the bottom line about it is, really, as an issue comes up, what has always been my history, and I think if you look at it, because every meeting we have attended, every meeting we've done has been videotaped, all right, is people ask me what I wanted to see at Butterfield. And I said, quite honestly, I didn't really care at that point, because it was more important for the process to be observed. There are rules, there are regulations, there are ways that you achieve compromise, there are certain things that we need to do as a community to conform to the law, all right? And quite frankly, that hasn't always been the case with the present village board or some previous village boards, and I think that's where we get into trouble. If you look at the history of the lawsuits that we've had and the expense that we've had associated with those lawsuits, it's pretty clear that things aren't done in a consistent, transparent, and in sometimes legal fashion. So my personal point is I will be on the village board to say, well, gee, here's the issue, here's what the law says we should be doing, here's how we need to address it. If you're not willing to do it that way, explain to me and explain to the residents of our community why we shouldn't do it that way. All right? So in order to answer your question, as long as things are done in a transparent, consistent, legally acceptable way, I have no problem being outvoted, but I'm not going to give anybody a pass either.
okay, thanks. Lynn, you did serve on the village board for a year as an appointee, but you did run for election at that
Yes.
time, and you lost in that election. And so now that you're running again, why do you think the voters of the village might see it differently, see your candidacy differently this time than last time?
for a number of different reasons. The year I spent on the board was a really, really contentious year. Every single board meeting seemed to take absolutely forever. There was just lots of fighting and lots of just lack of decorum from the audience even, and even within the board members there. And it didn't seem like the board at that time was really committed to collaborating and working together to really find solutions to the issues that we are facing. Also, at the time, I was trying to open up my Main Street business. Since then, in the 6 years since then, I have met a lot of people. Lots and lots of people have come through our doors. And I am really, really grateful for that opportunity. My friends that I've met through the store and also working and donating to the different organizations that go on around here have been enormous. And, you know, I think people know me a little better now, and I know them a little bit better now. And also, I have a better handle on really how all the different departments work together, and what the stresses on our community are. And I think I could do a better job then. And I think also my accessibility, that I'm in that store 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and that people are welcome to come in and talk to me at any given time. Any given time, and I invite you to come. I want that. I want your perspective. And, you know, I'm really hoping that that will resonate with the voters this year.
Michael?
So Steve, how has your involvement in village life to date served to make you a candidate that voters should support, even though you've lived here for a relatively short period of time?
Well, I am a businessman here in the community. I've made a lot of friends and business acquaintances. But, you know, in terms of what I have done for the village, I've worked in some aspects as a volunteer here at the school. I built a garden pathway over here. I'm very interested in the Fjord project, but, you know, I am new to this. I would like to speak to my qualifications because of my experience of over 20 years as a general contractor and a carpenter. I have a lot of experience in front of zoning boards and historical review and architectural review and engineering review, as well as just a general knowledge of how to get a job done. And, you know, in 2008, when that terrible stuff happened, I had 8 employees. And I was working in Boston at the time, where I lived for 17 years, I guess, almost 20 years. And I had to fire 6 people, and I lost a whole bunch of contracts that I had ready to go. And I consolidated everything. I had one guy work for me, and I was able to get through that situation. And I can take that skill and the ability to assess a budget and be realistic about things that can be done and make it happen. I'm a very hard worker.
Okay. Well, we thank the candidates for their participation, their willingness to speak to us and to one another. We thank the audience for your cooperation and kind attention. And with that, we'll close the proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.